Once upon a time, not so very long ago, great European powers were racing across the vast continent of Africa. They called this the Scramble for Africa. It was a time when maps were redrawn, not by the people who lived there, but by kings and queens in faraway lands. They claimed mountains, rivers, and entire kingdoms as their own. But in the heart of this great continent, in the highlands of Ethiopia, a powerful story was unfolding. It is the story of a man who would not let his people be conquered. His name was Menelik II. He was a leader who believed in freedom, unity, and the strength of his nation. He was a lion who roared so loudly that the entire world had to listen. This was an era of great change and great danger. The world was shrinking as steamships and telegraphs connected distant lands faster than ever before. For many nations in Africa and Asia, this meant the arrival of soldiers and governors from Europe who Skau, Iwa, Hamburger, and Tandur came to rule. But Ethiopia was different. It had a history stretching back thousands of years, a story woven with ancient kings, deep faith, and a fierce spirit of independence. This was the world Menelik was born into. It was a world where the old ways were being challenged by new, powerful forces. He knew that to protect his people's freedom, he would have to be stronger, smarter, and more united than any emperor before him. Imagine a chessboard, with Africa as the board, and its people as the pieces. Powerful players from across the sea were moving their pieces, capturing territory, and declaring checkmate over ancient kingdoms. In this high-stakes game, Menelik II emerged as a grandmaster. He saw the board with incredible clarity. He understood the motivations of his opponents and the strengths of his own people. He knew that a divided Ethiopia would fall, but a united Ethiopia could stand tall against any challenge. His story is not just about a single battle or a single treaty, it is about a lifetime of dedication to an idea, the idea of a free and sovereign Ethiopia, a beacon of hope for all. His journey was not an easy one. It was filled with moments of doubt, betrayal, and incredible hardship. But through it all, Menelik's belief in his destiny and the destiny of his nation never wavered. He was a visionary who saw a future where Ethiopia was not just a survivor of colonialism, but a modern, powerful nation on the world stage. This is the story of how one leader's courage and wisdom inspired a nation to achieve the impossible. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of hope can shine through. And that, my friends, is a story worth reading. A story worth remembering for all time. Menelik was born with royal blood flowing through his veins. His name at birth was Saleh Mariam, and he was the son of the king of Shewa, one of the most powerful kingdoms within the Ethiopian Empire. From a young age, he was surrounded by the stories of his ancestors, great rulers who traced their lineage all the way back to the legendary King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. These stories were not just tales for bedtime. They were lessons in leadership, courage, and the sacred duty to protect his homeland. He grew up learning the art of governance, the traditions of his people, and the skills of a warrior, preparing for the day he would one day rule. But fate had a different, more difficult path for the young prince. At that time, Ethiopia was not fully united. A powerful emperor named Tewodros II was on a mission to bring all the regional kingdoms under his central control. When Menelik was just a boy, Tewodros's army marched into Shewa. In the conflict that followed, Menelik's father died and the young prince was taken captive. He was brought to the emperor's mountain fortress, a place called Magdala. He was no longer a prince in his own court, but a prisoner of a powerful ruler. This could have been the end of his story, a promising life cut short by the harsh realities of power and ambition. For 10 long years, Menelik lived as a royal captive. Emperor Tewodros, however, didn't treat him like a common prisoner. He saw something special in the young man from Shewa. He admired his intelligence and his noble bearing. Tewodros even gave Menelik his own daughter, Altash Tewodros, in marriage. The emperor hoped that this union would tie Menelik to his court forever, making him a loyal part of his new, unified empire. But while Menelik was treated with a certain respect, he never forgot who he was. He was the rightful heir to the throne of Shewa, and his heart longed for his home and his people. During his years in captivity, Menelik learned valuable lessons. He watched Emperor Tewodros closely, studying his successes and his failures. He saw how Tewodros's ambition to unite Ethiopia was a noble goal, but he also saw how his harsh methods created enemies and sowed division. Menelik learned the delicate art of diplomacy, how to build relationships, and how to wait for the right moment. His years as a prisoner were like a long, difficult class in the school of leadership. He was a seed planted in rocky soil, but instead of withering, he was gathering the strength he would need to one day break free and grow into a mighty tree. The walls of Magdala were high, and the emperor's guards were watchful, but they could not contain the spirit of a future king. After a decade in captivity, Menelik knew the time had come to reclaim his destiny. He had been patient, he had been observant, and now, he was ready to act. With the help of a few loyal supporters who had secretly communicated with him, a plan for a daring escape was put into motion. It was a risky gamble. If he were caught, it would mean certain death. But the call of freedom and the pull of his homeland were stronger than any fear. One night, under the cover of darkness, Menelik slipped away from the fortress. His escape was the stuff of legends. He and his small group of followers had to navigate treacherous mountain passes and avoid the emperor's pursuing soldiers. It was a long and dangerous journey back to his home province of Shewa. Every shadow could have hidden an enemy, and every sound could have signaled their discovery. But Menelik's determination was like a compass, guiding him forward. As news of his escape spread, hope began to stir among the people of Shewa. Their long-lost prince was coming home. His return was not just a personal triumph, it was a symbol that their kingdom's spirit had not been broken. When Menelik finally arrived in Shewa, he was greeted not as a fugitive, but as a returning hero. The people rallied to his cause, with overwhelming support. They had been waiting for a leader to restore their kingdom's pride and independence, and in Menelik, they found that leader. He quickly consolidated his power, reclaiming his rightful title as King of Shewa. He was no longer the boy who had been taken captive. He was a man who had endured great hardship and emerged stronger. His experience had given him a deep understanding of power, politics, and the hearts of his people. From his throne in Shewa, Menelik began to look beyond his own kingdom's borders. He remembered the lessons he had learned from Emperor Tewodros. He shared the emperor's dream of a unified Ethiopia, but he knew it had to be achieved through a different path. Instead of conquering his neighbors through force alone, he sought to build alliances through diplomacy, respect, and mutual interest. His time as a prisoner had not made him bitter, it had made him wise. He began the long and patient process of weaving the separate threads of the Ethiopian kingdoms into a single strong tapestry, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. With Shewa firmly under his control, Menelik began the monumental task of nation-building. His vision was clear, a modern, unified Ethiopia that could stand on its own 2 feet in a world of growing empires. He knew that military strength alone was not enough. A truly strong nation needed modern technology, a robust economy, and connections to the outside world. So Menelik embarked on an ambitious campaign of modernization. He invited foreign advisors and engineers to his court, not as masters, but as partners in progress. He was fascinated by new inventions and ideas that could strengthen his country and improve the lives of his people. One of his first priorities was to build a new capital. He chose a spot in the hills of Shewa and named it Addis Ababa, which means new flower. This city was more than just a place for his palace, it was a symbol of his forward-looking vision. He oversaw the construction of roads and bridges to connect the far-flung regions of his expanding empire. He introduced the telephone and the telegraph, allowing for communication that was faster than the swiftest horseman. He also established a national currency, a modern postal system, and the country's first national bank. Each new project was a brick in the foundation of the modern Ethiopia he was building. Menelik also understood the importance of military modernization. While European powers were armed with the latest rifles and cannons, much of the Ethiopian army still used traditional weapons. Menelik used his growing wealth and diplomatic connections to purchase modern firearms from Europe. He carefully stockpiled rifles, machine guns, and artillery. He knew that in order to negotiate with the European powers on equal terms, he had to speak a language they understood, the language of military strength. He was not a warmonger but a pragmatist who understood that the best way to ensure peace was to be prepared for war. As he built up his infrastructure and his army, Menelik also worked tirelessly to expand and unify the empire. Through a masterful combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and, when necessary, military campaigns, he brought many southern kingdoms under his rule. This process was complex and sometimes violent, but Menelik's goal was always to create a larger, more cohesive Ethiopian state. He believed that all the diverse peoples within the empire's historic borders were part of a single national family. This unified and modernized empire, forged by his vision and will, would soon face its greatest test. As Menelik consolidated his power and became emperor of all Ethiopia, the so-called scramble for Africa was reaching its peak. The Kingdom of Italy, which was, a relatively new nation in Europe, was eager to build its own colonial empire, and saw Ethiopia as a prime target. They had already established a colony in nearby Eritrea, right there on the coast of the Red Sea. From that vantage point, they looked inland toward the green, fertile highlands of Ethiopia. The Italians approached Menelik, proposing a treaty of friendship and cooperation. Menelik, always a shrewd diplomat, was open to building relationships, but he was also cautious. In the year 1889, Ethiopian and Italian representatives signed the Treaty of Wuchale. The treaty was meant to define the relationship between the two nations, covering trade and diplomacy. It was written in both Amharic, the official language of Ethiopia, and Italian. Menelik signed the Amharic version, believing it was a fair agreement between two sovereign nations. This version stated that the Emperor of Ethiopia used the services of the Italian government to communicate with other European powers, if he so wished. It was, an optional arrangement, a tool of convenience that Menelik could choose to use or not. However, the Italian version of the treaty told a very different story. The translators had deliberately changed the meaning of one crucial article. The Italian text of Article 17 did not say that Menelik used Italy for his foreign relations. It said this subtle but significant change turned Ethiopia, in the eyes of the Italians and other European powers, into a protectorate of Italy. It meant that Ethiopia was no longer a fully independent nation, but was under Italy's control. When Menelik learned of this deception, he was furious. He had been tricked. He had offered a hand of friendship, and in return, Italy had tried to snatch his country's freedom. Menelik immediately wrote letters to the leaders of Europe, including the King of Italy, protesting this betrayal. He declared, "Ethiopia has need of no one. She stretches out her hands unto God." He made it clear that he would never accept a treaty that stripped his nation of its sovereignty. The Italians, however, refused to back down. They believed their military superiority would allow them to enforce their version of the treaty by force. They underestimated Menelik's resolve and the deep pride of the Ethiopian people. The line had been drawn in the sand. A conflict was now inevitable. Menelik began to mobilize his nation for a war to defend its very existence. The Italian government, confident in its technological superiority and colonial ambitions, decided to teach Menelik a lesson. They sent a large, well-equipped army into Ethiopia from their base in Eritrea. The Italian commander, General Oreste Baratieri, expected a swift and easy victory. He, like many Europeans at the time, held a deeply prejudiced view of African armies, considering them disorganized and poorly armed. He did not understand the land he was invading, or the people he was about to fight. He was marching into a trap, one set not by military genius alone, but by the fierce spirit of an entire nation. Menelik's call to arms resonated across the empire. From every province, from every village, warriors answered the call. Rasis, or regional lords, who had sometimes fought against each other, now marched side by side under the emperor's banner. It was a magnificent sight, a massive army, estimated at around 100,000 soldiers, gathering to defend their homeland. While many had modern rifles that Menelik had painstakingly acquired, others carried traditional spears and shields. They were united by a common cause to protect their freedom, their faith, and their emperor. Empress Taitu Betul, Menelik's brilliant and formidable wife, also marched with the army, inspiring the troops and helping to plan the strategy. The two armies converged near a town called Adwa, in the rugged mountains of the Tigray region. The Ethiopian forces knew this land intimately. They knew its hills, its valleys, and its hidden paths. The Italians, on the other hand, were in unfamiliar and difficult terrain, with poor maps and stretched supply lines. On March 1st, 1896, the battle began. The Italian forces, advancing in separate columns, became lost and separated in the confusing landscape. The Ethiopian army, guided by local knowledge and a brilliant battle plan, seized the opportunity. They fell upon the isolated Italian columns with overwhelming force and ferocious courage. The fighting was intense and brutal. The sound of rifles, cannons, and war cries echoed through the mountains. The Ethiopian soldiers, fighting on their own soil for their own liberty, fought with a passion the Italian soldiers could not match. By the end of the day, the battle was over. The modern, well-equipped Italian army had been decisively defeated. It was a catastrophic loss for Italy, and a stunning, almost unbelievable victory for Ethiopia. The mountains of Adwa had roared, and the world was shaken. The news of this victory would travel far beyond the battlefield, changing the course of history forever. The news of the Ethiopian victory at the Battle of Adwa spread like wildfire across the globe. In the capitals of Europe, there was shock and disbelief. A modern European army, a symbol of colonial power, had been crushed by an African force. It shattered the myth of European invincibility that had fueled the age of imperialism. For Italy, it was a national humiliation that led to the fall of its government. They were forced to sign a new treaty, the Treaty of Addis Ababa, which explicitly recognized the absolute independence of Ethiopia. Menelik had not only defended his nation, he had forced a European power to acknowledge its sovereignty on equal terms. For people of African descent all over the world, the victory at Adwa was a source of immense pride and inspiration. At a time when the entire continent of Africa, except for Ethiopia and Liberia, was falling under colonial rule, Adwa was a powerful symbol of resistance. It proved that Africans could defeat European armies and preserve their freedom. Black intellectuals, activists, and communities in the Americas, the Caribbean, and across Africa celebrated Ethiopia as a beacon of hope. It became a symbol of black pride and the dream of self-determination, fueling early Pan-African movements that called for unity and an end to colonial rule. The victory at Adwa had a profound psychological impact. Colonialism was not just about military and economic control, it was also built on the idea of racial and cultural superiority. The idea that Europeans were destined to rule over other peoples was widely accepted. Adwa challenged this racist ideology at its very core. It demonstrated that courage, strategy, and a powerful will to be free were not unique to any one race or continent. Ethiopia stood as a living testament to the fact that African civilizations were resilient and capable of defending themselves against even the most powerful aggressors. This single battle reshaped the global perception of Africa and colonialism. While the scramble for Africa continued elsewhere, Ethiopia's protected status sent a clear message. It showed that colonial expansion was not an unstoppable force of nature, it could be resisted and defeated. Menelik's Ethiopia became a symbol of what was possible when people unite to defend their land and their dignity. The echo of the victory at Adwa would continue to inspire future generations of freedom fighters across Africa and around the world, reminding them that the fight for liberty is always worth waging, no matter how great the odds. Emperor Menelik II's reign did not end with the Battle of Adwa. He continued to lead his nation for many more years, focusing on the modernization and consolidation he had started. He left behind a legacy that is woven into the very fabric of modern Ethiopia. He is remembered not just as a great warrior, but as a great unifier and a forward-thinking modernizer. He successfully brought together diverse peoples into a single, cohesive state, giving them a shared national identity and a common purpose. The infrastructure he built, the roads, the telegraph lines, the capital city of Addis Ababa, all became the framework for the nation's future development. His greatest legacy, however, is that of a defender of freedom. In an age when so many were silenced by the overwhelming force of colonialism, Menelik's roar was heard around the world. He stands as one of the most important figures in the history of African resistance. He proved that with strategic thinking, careful preparation, and unwavering unity, it was possible to defy an empire. His story became a powerful source of pride not only for Ethiopians, but for all people who value sovereignty and independence. He is the Lion of Shewa, who successfully guarded his home against the hunters of empire. The Ethiopian flag, with its iconic colors of green, yellow, and red, became a powerful symbol inspired by this legacy. These colors were adopted by many other African nations upon gaining their independence, as a tribute to Ethiopia's long history of sovereignty and its victory over colonialism. The green represents the fertile land, the yellow represents hope and peace, and the red represents the strength and the bloodshed in defense of the nation. When you see these colors, you are seeing a connection to Menelik's story and the enduring spirit of African independence that he so powerfully represented. Today, more than a century after his time, the story of Menelik II matters as much as ever. It is a timeless tale about the importance of unity in the face of external threats. It's a story about the wisdom of blending tradition with progress, of knowing who you are while also being open to new ideas. For anyone, anywhere, who faces a great challenge, Menelik's life offers a powerful lesson that courage, wisdom, and unity can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. He reminds us that freedom is a precious gift, one that must be cherished, protected, and, if necessary, fought for with all our might. If you want to discover more stories of African resilience and triumph, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Share this video to help spread Menelik II's legacy and inspire others with the enduring spirit of freedom. Thank you for being part of this journey. Imagine a queen who saw the world shifting beneath her feet, a woman who stood at the crossroads of tradition and modernity, suspicion and diplomacy, peace and war. A queen whose voice carried such weight that even generals hesitated, and whose decisions shaped not just a palace, not just a dynasty, but the survival of an entire nation. This is the story of Empress Taitu Betul of Ethiopia, the woman who defied Italy, challenged her enemies with intellect and iron resolve, and helped secure one of the greatest victories in African history. But how did a woman in a time and place dominated by men rise to command armies, dictate policy, and hold her own against the might of Europe? To answer that, we must journey back into the late 19th century, to an Ethiopia besieged by intrigue, foreign ambition, and the ever-looming shadow of colonization. The world at that time was changing rapidly. Africa was being carved apart in what history calls the scramble for Africa. Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Belgium, the great European powers, were racing to seize land, redraw maps, and exploit resources. By 1890, nearly the entire continent had been claimed, with only a handful of independent states left. Among them was Ethiopia, proud, ancient, and fiercely sovereign. But Ethiopia's survival was far from guaranteed. Surrounded by colonial possessions on all sides, it stood as both a prize and a target. Italy, humiliated by earlier failures, was determined to claim Ethiopia as its protectorate. The stage was set for confrontation. And it was in this world that Taitu Betul, wife of Emperor Menelik II, rose to prominence. But calling her simply wife would be an insult to her legacy. She was more than a consort. She was a strategist, a politician, and above all, a defender of Ethiopia's sovereignty. Stay with us to see how Empress Taitu's courage and determination shaped the destiny of a nation. Her story is just getting started. Born into a noble family around 1851, Taitu was no stranger to the intrigues of power. Her intelligence was sharp, her will unyielding. Those who underestimated her soon learned that behind her graceful demeanor was a mind that cut like steel. When she married Menelik, then king of Shewa and later emperor of Ethiopia, she became his partner not only in marriage but in governance. Together they ruled Ethiopia, but often it was Taitu's voice that tipped the scales of decision. She was fiercely protective of Ethiopia's independence and deeply suspicious of European intentions. Unlike some nobles who flirted with foreign advisors, Taitu saw through the promises and manipulations. She understood that treaties written in foreign tongues often carried hidden chains. Her suspicions would prove prophetic. In 1889, after Menelik was crowned emperor, Ethiopia signed the Treaty of Wuchala with Italy. On the surface, it was a treaty of peace and friendship, but buried within the clauses lay a fatal difference. In the Italian version, Article 17 declared that Ethiopia was obligated to conduct its foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making Ethiopia a protectorate. But in the Amharic version, no such submission existed. For Menelik, the treaty was one of mutual respect. For Italy, it was a tool of domination. When this deception came to light, outrage rippled through Ethiopia's court. Nobles debated, clerics prayed, warriors sharpened their spears, and at the center of it all was Empress Taitu. She did not hesitate. Where some urged caution, Taitu pressed for defiance. She argued that Ethiopia must reject Italy's false claims. Not tomorrow, not later, but now. But could Ethiopia, a landlocked African kingdom, truly defy a European empire armed with modern weapons and colonial ambition? The world doubted. Italy was confident. And yet, the empress would not bend. Taitu's influence extended beyond words. She rallied the conservative faction at court, those who were, wary of rapid modernization and foreign influence. She reminded Ethiopia's leaders that sovereignty, once lost, could never be regained. To her, compromise was, honestly, betrayal. Her leadership was not confined to palace chambers. When talks collapsed and Italy advanced from its colony in Eritrea, war became, inevitable. Menelik prepared his armies. But Taitu was not content to remain in the shadows. She marched north with him, not as a spectator but as a commander. She led thousands of cannoneers, directing artillery with real precision. The sight of a queen at the front lines electrified Ethiopian troops. To them, she was not just empress. She was a warrior mother, standing shoulder to shoulder in their fight for freedom. And then came the battle that would echo through history. The Battle of Adwa, March 1, 1896. Italy sent tens of thousands of troops confident of a swift victory. After all, no African army had defeated a European colonial force in open battle. Adwa, they believed, would be the final step in their conquest. But Ethiopia had prepared. Under Menelik's command, with Taitu by his side, the Ethiopian army, nearly 100,000 strong, confronted the Italians in the rugged highlands. The fighting was brutal. Waves of Ethiopian warriors clashed against disciplined Italian lines, but Ethiopia's forces fought with ferocity, their spirits lifted by the presence of their queen. Taitu herself ordered artillery fire, her cannons tearing through Italian ranks. By the end of the day, Italy's dream of empire lay in ruins. Over 7,000 Italian soldiers lay dead, and thousands more were captured. The Ethiopian victory at Adwa was total, a humiliation for Italy, and a triumph for Africa. For the first time in modern history, an African nation had decisively defeated a European power. Adwa was more than a battle. It was a symbol, proof that colonialism was not inevitable, that sovereignty could be defended, that Africa was not helpless. And standing at the heart of that triumph was Empress Taitu. But victory did not silence her critics. Taitu's strong will, her refusal to bow, and her dominance in decision-making earned her enemies at court. Where Menelik was known for diplomacy and patience, Taitu was uncompromising. To those who preferred appeasement, she seemed too hard. To foreign envoys, she was inflexible. Yet to ordinary Ethiopians, she was beloved, a queen who spoke truth, who lived without fear, who defended their dignity. Menelik himself, often cautious, sometimes relied on her strength. When faced with difficult decisions, he would evade with a famous phrase, "Yes, tomorrow," pushing choices into the future. But Taitu was the opposite. To her, hesitation was weakness. If something endangered Ethiopia, her answer was swift and sharp, absolutely not. Her clarity made her a powerful force, but power is a dangerous gift. In her later years, as Menelik's health declined, her influence grew, and with it, resentment among the nobility. Some whispered that she overreached, that she held too tightly to the reins of power. And so, just as she had lived, Taitu faced opposition until the end. After Menelik's death in 1913, the tides of politics shifted. She was sidelined, her authority diminished, her name pushed into the margins of history. But history has a way of remembering what matters. Today, Empress Taitu stands as more than the consort of Menelik II. She is remembered as a strategist, a leader, and honestly, one of the few women in history to command troops on the battlefield. She was the conscience of Ethiopia during one of its greatest crises, the voice that said no when compromise meant surrender, the hands that guided cannons at Adwa, the will that would not bow. And yet her story raises a haunting question. What would have become of Ethiopia, of Africa itself, if Taitu had not been there? If her suspicions of Italy's trickery had been ignored, if her courage on the battlefield had not inspired the troops, if her refusal to compromise had not hardened Menelik's resolve? Perhaps Adwa would have been lost. Perhaps Ethiopia would have been colonized like so many of its neighbors. Perhaps the beacon of independence in Africa would have been extinguished. But because of her, it was not. Empress Taitu was not perfect. She was fierce, sometimes unyielding, sometimes controversial. But she was also necessary. In an age of empires, she reminded the world that Ethiopia would not be taken. In an era when women's voices were silenced, hers could command an army. And that is her legacy, not merely as Menelik's wife, not merely as Ethiopia's empress, but as the woman who defied an empire and won. So the next time we speak of Ethiopia's great victories, let us remember not only the kings and generals, but the queen whose courage shaped the destiny of a nation. Because history is not only written by those who wield swords, sometimes it is written by those who wield conviction. And Empress Taitu Betul wielded conviction until her final breath. If you found Empress Taitu's story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to help more people discover her legacy.
History is filled with powerful figures. Kings, emperors, and warriors often dominate the stories we tell about the past. But sometimes, a figure emerges who challenges our expectations. They rewrite the rules of power. Empress Mintiwab of Ethiopia was one such person. She was a woman who in the 18th century refused to be a mere footnote in her husband's or her son's story. Instead, she claimed power for herself, not just as a temporary guardian, but as a crowned sovereign. Her story is one of immense ambition, political genius, and profound personal tragedy. It is a story that forces us to look again at the nature of leadership in a complex and changing world. Mintiwab's name, which means beautiful scent in the Amharic language, belies the steel and determination that defined her life. She was not simply an empress by marriage. She became a ruler in her own right, a co-sovereign who held the reins of the Ethiopian empire for decades. In an era when the role of women in politics was often confined to the shadows, Mintiwab stepped boldly into the light. She navigated the treacherous currents of court politics, forged alliances, and commanded armies. Her journey from a noblewoman of the highlands to the pinnacle of imperial power is a testament to her extraordinary character and intelligence, a story of survival and dominance in a world built by and for men. Her rule was a fascinating chapter in Ethiopia's long and storied history. It was a time of great cultural flourishing, but also one of deep political instability. Mintiwab stood at the center of it all. She was a builder, a diplomat, and a matriarch who used her family connections as a shield and a sword. But her story is also a cautionary tale. It shows how personal rivalries, even within a family, can threaten to tear a nation apart. The clash between Mintiwab and her ambitious daughter-in-law became a symbol of the fractures that were beginning to appear in the very fabric of the empire, setting the stage for a period of decline. To understand Empress Mintiwab is to understand the complexities of power. It is to see how strength can be found in diplomacy as much as in battle. Her life raises profound questions about what it means to lead. Is leadership about absolute control, or is it about the wisdom to share power? How does one balance personal ambition with the good of a nation? Mintiwab's story does not provide easy answers. Instead, it offers a powerful portrait of a woman who dared to rule, leaving behind a legacy that continues to resonate through the centuries. A legacy written in the stone of castles and the memory of a nation. To understand Empress Mintiwab, we must first understand the world she inhabited. We must travel back to 18th century Ethiopia, a land of ancient traditions and rugged, breathtaking landscapes. At the heart of this empire was a city unlike any other in Africa, Gondar. Founded in the 17th century by Emperor Fasilides, Gondar was the imperial capital, a permanent center of power after centuries of mobile royal camps. It was a city of magnificent castles, ornate churches, and bustling markets. European travelers who reached it were astonished, calling it the Camelot of Africa, a testament to its mythical and powerful aura in a continent often misunderstood by outsiders. Gondar was more than just a collection of impressive buildings. It was the nerve center of the Ethiopian Empire. From within its royal enclosure, the Fasil Gebi, emperors made laws, received ambassadors, and presided over a sophisticated court culture. This was a world of intricate ceremony, religious devotion, and constant political maneuvering. power was a currency traded in whispers in the palace corridors, as much as it was declared in royal edicts. The city was a melting pot of nobles from across the empire's diverse regions, each vying for influence and favor at the imperial court. It was into this vibrant and dangerous world that Mintiwab would one day step. The Ethiopia of this era was a Christian kingdom, an island of faith surrounded by different religious and political powers. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church was not just a spiritual institution, it was a fundamental pillar of the state and national identity. The emperors were seen as the protectors of this faith, their legitimacy deeply intertwined with their piety. This religious landscape was complex with fierce theological debates, often spilling over into politics, creating factions and feuds that could make or unmake an emperor. For any ruler, navigating these religious disputes was as critical as commanding the loyalty of their generals. This was the stage upon which Mintiwab's life would unfold. It was a world of immense opportunity and profound risk. The splendor of Gondar's castles concealed a political arena where alliances were fragile and betrayal was a constant threat. The very structure of the empire, with powerful regional lords often challenging the central authority of the emperor, meant that ruling required a delicate balance of force and diplomacy. Mintiwab would have to master this dangerous game. She would have to learn to navigate the complexities of faith, family, and factionalism to not only survive but to thrive in the heart of the Ethiopian Empire. Empress Mintiwab was not born into the imperial Solomonic dynasty that had ruled Ethiopia for centuries. She came from the powerful nobility of Kwara, a region in the highlands west of Lake Tana. Her family was influential, respected, and commanded significant military strength in its own right. Her birth name was Welete Giorgis, but she was known by the name Mintiwab. Her lineage gave her status and connections, making her a valuable asset in the intricate web of Ethiopian politics. She was not just a beautiful woman, she was the daughter of a powerful house, a strategic prize for any aspiring ruler looking to consolidate their power base. Her moment came when she caught the eye of the reigning emperor Bakafa. Their marriage was far more than a simple love match. It was a masterful political alliance. Emperor Bakafa was a strong but often ruthless ruler, known for traveling his empire in disguise to observe his people and his officials. He faced numerous plots and rebellions from regional nobles who resented his attempts to centralize power. By marrying Mintiwab, Bakafa secured the loyalty of her influential family and the formidable military forces of Kwara. This union was a cornerstone of his strategy to stabilize his reign and secure his dynasty. Mintiwab quickly proved to be more than just a political bride. At the court in Gondar, she demonstrated a sharp intellect and a keen understanding of power. She was not a passive queen consort, content to remain in the background. She became a trusted advisor to her husband, learning the art of statecraft directly from one of Ethiopia's most cunning emperors. She observed the court's intrigues, understood the motivations of the powerful nobles, and learned how to build and maintain loyalty. This period was her apprenticeship. It was during her years as Bakafa's wife that she forged the political skills that would one day make her a ruler. The birth of her son, Iyasu, further solidified her position. He was the heir to the throne, the future of the Solomonic dynasty. His birth ensured that Mintiwab's influence would extend far beyond her husband's lifetime. She was now the mother of a future emperor, a role that gave her immense authority and a vested interest in the stability of the realm. Her marriage to Bakafa had brought her to the center of power. Her son's birth guaranteed she would remain there. The stage was set for her transformation from queen consort to the ultimate power behind and beside the throne. The turning point in Mintiwab's life arrived with the death of her husband, Emperor Bakafa, in 1730. The passing of a powerful emperor often created a dangerous power vacuum in Ethiopia. Regional lords and ambitious nobles would see it as an opportunity to challenge the succession and advance their own interests. Mintiwab's son, Iyasu II, was just a child. According to tradition, she would be expected to act as his regent, a temporary caretaker of the throne until he came of age. But Mintiwab had grander ambitions. She had no intention of being a mere placeholder, a temporary guardian of power who would fade into obscurity. In a move that was both audacious and brilliant, Mintiwab refused the limited role of regent. Instead, she orchestrated her own coronation. She had herself crowned not as a regent, but as a co-ruler alongside her young son. This was a stunning and almost unprecedented act in Ethiopian history. It meant that she was not just ruling in her son's name, she was ruling in her own right, vested with the full authority of a sovereign. The crown was placed on her head, a symbol for all to see that her power was not borrowed. It was hers. This single decision transformed her from the emperor's mother into an empress regnant. This bold gambit was not without risk. It challenged centuries of patriarchal tradition and could have easily sparked a rebellion. But Mintiwab had prepared for this moment. She drew on the immense power of her own family from Kwara. Her brothers and other relatives were placed in the most important positions in the government and the military. This created a powerful Kwaran faction at court, a loyal bloc of supporters who owed their positions directly to her. Her family's strength became her shield, protecting her and her young son from any potential challengers who questioned her right to rule. By being crowned, Mintiwab sent a clear message to the empire. She was not a woman to be underestimated. She was the legitimate, divinely sanctioned ruler of Ethiopia, sharing the throne with her son. This act secured the immediate succession and stabilized the empire at a moment of great vulnerability. It was a masterstroke of political theater and raw power. Mintiwab had not just protected her son's inheritance, she had claimed her own. For the next 3 decades, the Ethiopian empire would not have one ruler, but 2. The young emperor Iyasu II and his formidable mother, Empress Mintiwab. With her crown secured, Empress Mintiwab settled into the long and complex task of governing the Ethiopian empire. Her reign, alongside her son Iyasu II, was characterized by a distinct political style. She understood that power in Ethiopia did not just flow from the emperor's decree, it rested on a delicate network of alliances, family ties, and regional loyalties. Her primary strategy was to consolidate power by placing her own kin in key positions. Her brothers, particularly the powerful Ras Wolde Loyal, became her most important generals and governors. This so-called Kwaran dynasty, as it became known, effectively ran the empire on her behalf. This reliance on family was both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it ensured a core of unwavering loyalty around the throne. Mintiwab could trust her relatives to carry out her orders and defend her against plots from rival noble houses. They became the backbone of her administration, managing the provinces, leading the armies, and collecting the revenues that funded the imperial court. This strategy allowed her to project her authority across the vast and rugged domains of the empire, maintaining a level of central control that had often eluded her predecessors. She ruled through her family, making the state an extension of her own household. Beyond her family, Mintiwab was also a skilled diplomat. She understood the importance of culture and religion as tools of statecraft. During her reign, Gondar experienced a cultural golden age. She was a great patron of the arts, commissioning the construction of beautiful churches and palaces. The most famous of these is the Debre Haile Selassie Church in Gondar, renowned for its stunning ceiling covered with the faces of angels. She also built her own palace, a castle of exquisite design just outside the main royal enclosure. These projects were not just acts of piety or vanity. They were statements of power, wealth, and legitimacy, reinforcing the divine right of her and her son to rule. Her rule brought a period of relative stability and cultural flourishing. The court at Gondar was lavish, and the arts thrived under her patronage. She fostered trade and maintained a degree of peace, within the empire's core provinces. However, her method of rule, favoring her Kwaran relatives above all others, sowed seeds of resentment. The traditional nobility of other regions, particularly the Amhara lords, felt excluded from power. They saw the court as being dominated by outsiders from Kwara. This growing discontent would create deep fractures in the political landscape, setting the stage for future conflict that would test Mintiwab's power to its very limits. As her son, Emperor Iyasu II, came of age, Empress Mintiwab faced a new and unexpected challenge to her authority. This challenge did not come from a rebellious general or a rival lord. It came from within her own family, from her daughter-in-law. To further cement the power of the dynasty, Mintiwab had arranged for Iyasu to marry Wubit, a beautiful and ambitious woman from the powerful Oromo peoples. The marriage was intended to be a strategic alliance, bringing the influential Oromo clans into the imperial fold and broadening the dynasty's base of support. But it would have consequences that Mintiwab could never have foreseen. Wubit, who took the name Welete Bersabe, was not content to be a pawn in her mother-in-law's political games. She was proud, intelligent, and deeply aware of her own noble heritage. She quickly grew to resent the overwhelming influence that Mintiwab and her Kwaran relatives held at court. Welete Bersabe believed that as the emperor's wife, she, not the emperor's mother, should be the most powerful woman in the empire. She began to build her own faction, promoting her Oromo relatives to positions of power to counterbalance the dominance of Mintiwab's Kwaran family. The palace in Gondar became a battleground for two rival queens. The rivalry between Mintiwab and Welete Bersabe was more than just a personal feud. It represented a fundamental clash of political interests and regional identities within the empire. On one side stood Mintiwab, the established matriarch, with her power rooted in her Kwaran kin and the Amhara political establishment she had cultivated. On the other was Welete Bersabe, the young and ambitious upstart, whose power was based on her Oromo connections, a group that was increasingly influential in imperial politics. The emperor, Iyasu II, was caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his affection for his wife. This division at the very heart of the imperial family paralyzed the court. Every appointment, every political decision became a point of contention between the two factions. The Kwaran nobles loyal to Mintiwab clashed with the Oromo nobles loyal to Welete Bersabe. The unity and stability that Mintiwab had worked so hard to build began to crumble, replaced by suspicion and intrigue. The whispers in the palace corridors grew louder, and the empire became effectively divided into two camps. The personal rivalry of two powerful women had escalated into a political crisis that threatened the very foundations of the state. The death of Emperor Iyasu II in 1755 brought the simmering conflict to a boiling point. His passing left another child on the throne, his son Iyoas, the grandson of both Mintiwab and Welete Bersabe. Now the question of who would control the empire was no longer a matter of influence. It was a struggle for survival. Mintiwab, the experienced stateswoman, naturally assumed she would continue to rule as she had for her son. But Welete Bersabe, the young emperor's mother, saw this as her opportunity to finally seize control. She was determined that her son's reign would not be a repeat of his father's, dominated by his grandmother. The rivalry between the two queens now openly split the empire. Welete Bersabe, championing her Oromo heritage, insisted that the Oromo language be spoken at court, a direct challenge to the traditional Amharic language of the Amhara Tigrayan elite. She summoned her powerful Oromo relatives to Gondar, forming a formidable army to back her authority. In response, Mintiwab called upon her own Kwaran kin and their allies among the Amhara nobility. The capital, Gondar, became an armed camp, with the factions of the two queens facing each other down. The empire was on the brink of civil war, a conflict born from the feud within its ruling family. The situation escalated beyond the control of either woman. To break the deadlock, one of the factions made a fateful decision. They called upon a powerful warlord from the Tigray region, Ras Mikael Sehul, to come to Gondar and act as an arbiter. Ras Mikael was a brilliant but utterly ruthless political operator. He arrived in Gondar with his own army and his own ambitions. He initially played the two sides against each other, but his ultimate goal was to claim supreme power for himself. The two queens, in their struggle for dominance, had inadvertently invited a predator into the heart of the empire. This was the beginning of the end for Gondar's golden age. Ras Mikael Sehul eventually took control, murdering the young Emperor Eoas and installing his own puppet rulers on the throne. Empress Mintiwab was utterly defeated. Her power was broken, and she was forced to retreat from the capital to her palace at Kusquam, where she lived out the rest of her days in seclusion, a witness to the chaos she had unwittingly helped unleash. The central authority of the emperor collapsed, and Ethiopia entered a long and dark period known as the Zemene Mesafint, or the era of the princes, where regional warlords ruled and the emperor was a mere figurehead. Empress Mintiwab's story is one of spectacular success and profound failure. For decades, she was one of the most powerful people in Ethiopia, a woman who defied tradition to rule an empire. Her political intelligence was undeniable. She successfully navigated the treacherous transition after her husband's death, secured the throne for her son, and maintained a long period of stability and cultural richness. Her patronage of art and architecture left an indelible mark on Gondar, with her palace at Kusquam and the churches she endowed standing as monuments to her wealth, piety, and influence. She proved that a woman could rule with as much authority and skill as any man. Her boldness is a key part of her legacy. The decision to be crowned as co-ruler was a revolutionary act that reshaped the possibilities for women in power. She was not content to be a regent, a temporary placeholder. She claimed sovereignty for herself, a clear declaration of her ambition and her belief in her own right to rule. In this, she stands as a towering figure in the history of female leadership, not just in Africa, but across the world. Her story is a powerful reminder that history has always been shaped by formidable women, even if their stories are too often left in the margins. However, her legacy is also a tragic one. The very method she used to secure her power, her reliance on her Quarren family, ultimately contributed to the empire's fragmentation. By creating a court dominated by one faction, she alienated others, fostering deep resentments that exploded into open conflict. Her inability to manage the rivalry with her daughter-in-law, Velete Basabe, led directly to the intervention of Ras Mikael Sehul and the collapse of imperial authority. Her reign demonstrates that even the most skillful leader can be undone by personal rivalries and the unintended consequences of their own strategies. She built a powerful state, but its foundations were too narrow to last. So, what can we learn from Empress Mintiwab? Her life forces us to ask fundamental questions about leadership. What is the true nature of power? Is it the ability to dominate or the wisdom to build consensus? How does a leader balance the need for a loyal inner circle with the imperative to create an inclusive and just society for all? Mintiwab's story offers no simple answers. Instead, it presents us with a complex, powerful, and deeply human portrait of a leader who reached for greatness, achieved it for a time, and ultimately saw her world crumble. Her shadow lingers over Ethiopian history, a timeless lesson in the triumphs and tragedies of power. If you enjoyed learning about Empress Mintiwab and her remarkable legacy, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories from history, and share it with others who might be inspired by her journey. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light.
Imagine a queen who reigned not through conquest but through faith. A woman who held the crown of one of the world's oldest empires, not in an age of calm prosperity, but in a time of upheaval, resistance, and relentless change. She was crowned with the weight of centuries of tradition pressing upon her shoulders, yet she faced the rising winds of modernity at her gates. This is the story of Empress Zewditu I of Ethiopia. the first and only woman in modern times to sit upon Ethiopia's imperial throne. Her reign was marked by devotion to the Orthodox faith, political struggles, betrayal, and a tragic end. But her legacy is far more complex than history remembers. To truly understand Zewditu, we must first step back into Ethiopia at the dawn of the 20th century, a kingdom both ancient and fragile, proud yet divided. Its mountains and valleys echoed with centuries of tradition, but also with the tensions of a changing world. When her father, Emperor Menelik II, died in 1913, the empire was shaken to its core. The loss reverberated through every corner of the nation, leaving uncertainty in its wake. Menelik had been a towering figure, one of Africa's most celebrated rulers, admired both at home and abroad for his vision and strength. He was the man who defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a battle that ensured Ethiopia remained independent at a time when almost the entire continent had been carved into colonies by European powers. Adwa was more than a victory. It was a declaration that Ethiopia would not bow to European imperialism, inspiring hope across Africa. It made Menelik a legend, his name forever etched in the hearts of his people. But the death of such a leader left a void that would prove difficult to fill, setting the stage for a new and uncertain era in Ethiopia's history. Menelik's passing ignited uncertainty. Who would inherit the throne? His chosen heir was not his daughter Zewditu, but rather his grandson, Lige Iyasu, a charismatic young man with promise. For a moment it seemed Ethiopia's future was secure, but appearances can deceive. Iyasu's reign quickly became a source of anxiety. Though clever and energetic, his rule was marred by controversy. Rumors spread that he had converted to Islam, a shocking possibility in a nation whose monarchy was inseparable from the Orthodox Christian faith. Whether these rumors were true or exaggerated remains debated, but perception often matters more than reality. Nobles whispered, clergy grew uneasy, foreign powers watched carefully. Iyasu's decisions, politically daring but often reckless, deepened the sense of instability. And as Iyasu faltered, eyes turned back to Menelik's daughter, Zewditu. She was not an obvious candidate for the throne. She had endured personal losses, including the deaths of her children, and had experienced exile, imprisonment, and political manipulation. But she also embodied legitimacy. She was Menelik's blood, and unlike Iyasu, her devotion to the Orthodox Church was unquestionable. By 1916, Iyasu's time had run out. With the powerful backing of the church and Ethiopia's nobility, he was deposed. Into this storm of politics and faith stepped Zewditu, elevated to the throne as Empress of Ethiopia. Her coronation marked a turning point in history. Ethiopia, for the first time in its modern era, had a woman on the imperial throne. But this was not a reign of unchecked authority. Alongside her stood Ras Tafari Makonnen, a rising noble who had already distinguished himself as a statesman. The arrangement was deliberate. Zewditu would embody tradition and spiritual authority, while Ras Tafari would guide Ethiopia's modernization and diplomacy. It was a dual leadership, and though it worked in theory, in practice it planted the seeds of conflict. Zewditu's image was deeply tied to faith. She embraced her role as a guardian of orthodoxy, funding the construction of churches, supporting the clergy, and reinforcing the rituals that bound Ethiopia together. To her supporters, she was a motherly figure, a monarch of devotion who shielded Ethiopia's traditions from erosion. Her reign, however, coincided with a world in transition. Automobiles and telegraphs were arriving in Ethiopia. New schools were being built, new laws debated. Ras Tafari envisioned an Ethiopia connected to the world, while Zewditu looked to preserve Ethiopia's spiritual soul. This balance was never easy. Ras Tafari gained recognition abroad, securing Ethiopia's admission into the League of Nations in 1923, strengthening ties with foreign powers, and initiating reforms at home. For many Ethiopians, especially the younger generation and urban elites, he represented progress. For Zewditu and her circle of conservative nobles, he represented danger, a threat to the old ways, a challenge to Ethiopia's sacred traditions. But Zewditu was no mere figurehead. She had survived too much to be dismissed as weak. She had been imprisoned, exiled, and silenced before. She understood the brutality of politics. Her reign was not one of passive acceptance, but of active guardianship. Still, her power was fragile, hemmed in not only by Ras Tafari but also by her own household. Her husband, Ras Gugsawel, was a powerful noble in his own right, respected and feared by many at court. Appointed governor of Begemder, he nurtured ambitions that would eventually collide with Ras Tafari's growing authority and vision for Ethiopia. For years, the empire balanced on a knife's edge, with Zewditu's deep piety and Ras Tafari's modernizing reforms coexisting uneasily, each pulling the country in different directions. Meanwhile, Gugsawel quietly prepared for confrontation, gathering support among conservative nobles and clergy. That confrontation finally came in the spring of 1930, shaking the empire to its core. Gugsawela launched a rebellion against Ras Tafari, rallying conservative forces who opposed the rapid pace of modernization and feared the loss of tradition. The battle was fierce, but the outcome was decisive. Gugsawel was killed, his forces crushed, and his ambitions ended. The news struck Zewditu like a hammer, leaving her devastated and alone at the heart of the court. Within days she fell gravely ill, her health rapidly declining as the empire watched in shock. Some whispered that grief consumed her, that the shock of her husband's defeat broke her spirit beyond repair. Others suspected illness, or even political intrigue swirling within the palace walls. Whatever the truth, the timing was inescapable and impossible to ignore. Just as Gugsawel's rebellion failed, Empress Zewditu's life came to an end, closing a dramatic chapter in Ethiopian history. In April of 1930, Ethiopia's only modern female monarch was gone, leaving a nation forever changed by her reign and her loss. Her death marked the close of an era. With Zewditu's passing, the throne passed fully to Ras Tafari Makanen, who would be crowned later that year as Emperor Haile Selassie I, the last great monarch of Ethiopia. So who was Zewditu really? Was she overshadowed by stronger men? Her father Menelik, her regent Ras Tafari, her ambitious husband Gugsawel? Or was she something more subtle, more enduring? A ruler who chose faith over force, tradition over change, devotion over ambition? Her reign was not without achievements, and her impact on Ethiopia's history remains significant. Under Zewditu, slavery was officially abolished, a monumental step that placed Ethiopia on the path toward modern recognition and social progress. She invested heavily in the church, ensuring that spiritual life flourished even as political struggles and uncertainty roiled the empire. She provided stability at a time when Ethiopia could have fractured completely, holding the nation together through turbulent years. And yet, her story is bittersweet, marked by both triumph and quiet sorrow. Overshadowed in the grand sweep of history, she is often remembered only as the monarch before Haile Selassie, her legacy sometimes overlooked. But her uniqueness cannot be denied, nor can her quiet strength. At a time when women in much of the world were still denied the right to vote, Zewditu sat upon the throne of an empire, a woman ruling in her own right, commanding respect through her lineage, her faith, and her remarkable resilience. Her reign embodied contrasts between faith and politics, tradition and progress, loyalty and betrayal. She began as a symbol of continuity, but her final days were marked by tragedy. Still, she endured, holding the crown with dignity, even as storms raged around her. Perhaps that is her true legacy? Not that she conquered or transformed, but that she endured. She was a bridge between the old and the new, between Ethiopia's sacred past and its uncertain future. She proved that the power of spirit could matter as much as the power of armies. So the next time we speak of Ethiopia's monarchs, let us not forget the queen who reigned in faith, suffered in silence, and passed on her throne to one of history's most famous emperors. Her story is not just about loss, it is about resilience. Because in the heart of every empire there are rulers who fight with swords and rulers who fight with spirit. And Empress Zewditu fought with spirit until her final breath. If you want to discover more about Empress Zewditu and other remarkable figures from history, be sure to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories from the past. Your curiosity keeps history alive.
In the Grand Hall of the League of Nations, a solitary figure stood before the world. It was June of 1936. This was Haile Selassie I, the Emperor of Ethiopia. He was a man of small stature, yet he carried the weight of his entire nation upon his shoulders. His country, one of Africa's most ancient kingdoms, was under attack. It was being consumed by the modern war machine of Mussolini's Italy. He had come to this global assembly not as a conqueror, but as a petitioner. He was there to seek justice and to appeal to the conscience of humanity. His speech would become one of the most memorable and haunting moments of the 20th century. His words were not just for the powerful delegates seated before him. They were a message sent out to every corner of the globe. He spoke of principle, of the promises made between nations, and of the devastating consequences when those promises are broken. He described the horrors of modern warfare unleashed upon his people. Chemical weapons were raining down from the sky, poisoning men, women, and children. He asked a simple yet profound question. Should it be that the small and the weak must perish at the hands of the strong? His plea was a test for the very idea of collective security that the League of Nations was built upon. The emperor's presence itself was a powerful statement. Here was an African leader, the head of an independent state, addressing a predominantly European body. He was demanding that the rules they had all agreed upon be applied equally to everyone. He warned that the fate of Ethiopia was not an isolated incident. If the world stood by and allowed his nation to fall, it would set a dangerous precedent. It would mean that international law was meaningless. He prophesied that the injustice being done to his people would eventually visit others. It was a stark and chilling prediction of the global conflict that was to come. This single moment, broadcast across the world, captured the imagination of millions. Haile Selassie became a symbol of noble resistance against overwhelming aggression. He was David facing Goliath on the world stage. His plea highlighted the failures of international diplomacy in the face of rising fascism. The world listened, and many were moved by his dignity and the righteousness of his cause. But in that moment, the great powers did not act. Yet, the emperor's speech planted a seed. It was a seed of hope, of defiance, and a call for a more just world order that would echo for decades to come. Long before he became a global icon, he was a boy named Tafari Makonnen. He was born on July 23, 1892, in a small village in the Harar province of Ethiopia. His world was one of ancient traditions and deep-rooted history. Ethiopia was a land that had never been colonized, a point of immense pride for its people. Tafari was born into the heart of its aristocracy. His father, Ras Makonnen, was a respected general, a provincial governor, and a cousin to the reigning emperor Menelik II. From his earliest days, the young Tafari was surrounded by the workings of power, leadership, and the responsibilities that came with noble birth. His father recognized the boy's exceptional intelligence and serious nature. He ensured that Tafari received a unique education, one that blended traditional Ethiopian learning with modern European ideas. He was tutored by Ethiopian priests who taught him the ancient Ge'ez language and the doctrines of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This gave him a profound connection to his country's spiritual and cultural heritage. At the same time, French missionaries were brought in to teach him about the wider world. He learned French, the language of international diplomacy, and studied history, science, and political thought from beyond Ethiopia's borders. This dual education would prove essential for the path that lay ahead. Tragedy struck early in Tafari's life. His mother died when he was just an infant, and his father, Ras Makonnen, passed away when Tafari was only 13. These losses forced the young man to mature quickly. He was placed under the guardianship of Emperor Menelik II himself, bringing him to the imperial court in the new capital, Addis Ababa. There he could observe the complex machinery of government firsthand. He watched how the old emperor balanced the power of regional nobles and managed the affairs of the state. It was a masterclass in politics, and Tafari was a diligent student. He learned the arts of patience, careful observation, and strategic thinking. Even as a teenager, Tafari was given significant responsibilities. Emperor Menelik II saw his potential and appointed him as the governor of a small province. This was a test. The young governor excelled, demonstrating a keen sense of justice and an aptitude for administration. He was later appointed governor of his home province of Harar, a position his father had once held. It was here that he began to put his modernizing ideas into practice on a small scale. He worked to improve the local administration and build up a loyal following. His competence and quiet ambition did not go unnoticed. He was clearly a rising star in the Ethiopian imperial court. The path to the throne was not a straight one for Tafari Makonnen. After Emperor Menelik II's health failed, a period of instability followed. Menelik's designated heir, Lige Iyasu, took the throne. However, Iyasu's leadership was controversial. He was seen as unpredictable, and his apparent leanings toward Islam alienated the powerful Christian nobility that formed the bedrock of the Ethiopian Empire. The country's powerful lords and the leaders of the Orthodox Church grew deeply concerned. They saw the very fabric of their ancient Christian kingdom being threatened. A change was needed to restore stability and preserve the nation's identity. In 1916, the leading nobles of Ethiopia took a decisive step. They deposed Lige Iyasu. In his place, they named Menelik II's daughter, Zewditu, as empress. However, Zewditu was a traditionalist, more interested in religious matters than in the day-to-day running of the state. The nobles understood that the country needed a forward-thinking leader to manage the government and deal with the outside world. They chose the 24-year-old Tafari Makonnen for this role. He was given the title of Ras, equivalent to a duke, and was named regent and heir to the throne. This was a delicate and complex arrangement. Empress Zewditu held the crown, but Ras Tafari held the real power. As regent, Ras Tafari began the slow and difficult process of guiding Ethiopia into the modern era. His position was not secure. He faced constant opposition from conservative factions at court who were loyal to Empress Zewditu. They resisted his reforms, seeing them as a threat to Ethiopia's ancient traditions. The regent had to move carefully, balancing his modernizing ambitions with the need to maintain political stability. He skillfully built alliances, strengthened the central government, and gradually consolidated his own power. One of his greatest early achievements was securing Ethiopia's admission to the League of Nations in 1923, a move that formally recognized its sovereignty on the international stage. The power struggle between the modernizing regent and the conservative empress eventually came to a head. In 1928, Ras Tafari pressured the empress to grant him the title of Negus, or king, effectively making him a co-ruler. This further cemented his authority. Empress Zewditu passed away in April 1930. Just 2 days later, the path was finally clear. Ras Tafari Makonnen was proclaimed Emperor of Ethiopia. On November 2, 1930, he was crowned in a magnificent ceremony in Addis Ababa. He took the regal name Haile Selassie I, meaning Power of the Trinity. He also claimed the titles King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and the Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, asserting his lineage from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Once he was firmly on the throne, Emperor Haile Selassie I accelerated his mission to transform his ancient kingdom into a modern nation. He believed that Ethiopia had to adapt to survive in a rapidly changing world. It could not remain isolated. His vision was not to erase Ethiopia's unique culture, but to strengthen it with modern institutions and technology. One of his first and most significant acts was to introduce Ethiopia's first written constitution in 1931. This was a revolutionary step. It established a parliament, though with limited powers, and began to shift the basis of rule from the personal authority of the emperor to a system based on law. Education was the cornerstone of the emperor's modernization program. He understood that a modern state needed educated citizens and skilled administrators. He had seen the power of knowledge in his own life. He famously said, "Education is the foundation of all progress." Haile Selassie poured resources into building new schools throughout the country, including the first university, which was later named in his honor. He sent promising young Ethiopians abroad to study in Europe and America. He wanted them to return with the skills in medicine, engineering, and public administration that the country so desperately needed. This created a new, educated elite loyal to him and his vision. The emperor also focused on overhauling the country's infrastructure and economy. Ethiopia was a vast and rugged land with few roads, making communication and trade incredibly difficult. He initiated projects to build roads, bridges, and telephone lines to connect the disparate parts of his empire. He established a national currency and a state bank to modernize the economy. He also sought to centralize the tax system, taking power away from regional lords and strengthening the central government in Addis Ababa. These reforms were designed to unify the country, foster economic growth, and make his government more effective and powerful. Another crucial area for reform was the military. The Ethiopian army had traditionally been a collection of feudal levies, loyal to their local lords rather than to the central state. This made the country vulnerable. Haile Selassie knew that a modern professional army was essential to defend Ethiopia's independence. He hired foreign advisors to train his soldiers. He established a military academy to create a professional officer corps. He also began purchasing modern weapons from abroad. He was in a race against time, trying to build a military capable of defending his nation from the growing threat posed by Italy's colonial ambitions in the region. The emperor's ambitious modernization efforts were tragically cut short. In Italy, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini dreamed of avenging a humiliating defeat Italy had suffered against Ethiopia in 1896. He also coveted Ethiopia's resources and sought to build a new Roman Empire. In October 1935, ignoring international law and the treaties Ethiopia was a part of, Mussolini's forces invaded. The Italian army was a formidable modern military. It possessed tanks, heavy artillery, and a powerful air force. Against this, the newly reorganizing Ethiopian army, though brave, was vastly outmatched. They fought with immense courage, but their rifles were no match for Italy's advanced weaponry. The invasion was brutal. The Italian forces showed no mercy. They targeted not only soldiers but also civilians. They bombed undefended towns and villages from the air. Most horrifically, they used chemical weapons, dropping mustard gas on Ethiopian troops and the civilian population. This was a clear violation of the Geneva Protocol, which Italy had signed. The poison gas caused agonizing burns, blindness, and slow, painful death. It was a new kind of terror, one that Ethiopia was completely unprepared for. Haile Selassie himself went to the front lines to try and rally his troops, but the technological gap was simply too wide to overcome. As the Italian army advanced on the capital Addis Ababa, Haile Selassie was faced with a terrible choice. He could stay and fight to the death, becoming a martyr but ensuring the complete destruction of his government. Or he could escape to continue the fight from abroad to become a living symbol of his nation's resistance and to plead its case to the world. He chose the latter. In May 1936, he and his family boarded a train and began a long journey into exile. It was a heartbreaking decision, but he believed it was the only way to keep the hope of an independent Ethiopia alive. It was from this position of exile that he made his historic journey to the League of Nations in Geneva. He stood before the Assembly of Nations as a sovereign leader whose country was being illegally and brutally conquered. He spoke with quiet dignity and immense moral authority. "I am here today to claim that justice which is due to my people," he declared. He described the horrors his people were enduring. He warned the delegates that if they failed to act, if they allowed this aggression to stand, then they were all doomed. "It is us today," he said. "It will be you tomorrow." His words were prophetic, but the League, paralyzed by fear and self-interest, failed to take meaningful action. After his powerful but ultimately unsuccessful plea in Geneva, Haile Selassie and his family settled in Bath, England. The years of exile were a time of great difficulty and personal sadness for the emperor. He was a king without a kingdom, a leader separated from his people. He lived in a modest home, far from the palaces of Addis Ababa. He spent his days tirelessly working to keep the cause of Ethiopia alive in the consciousness of the world. He wrote letters, gave interviews, and met with sympathetic politicians and public figures. He was a constant reminder of the failure of collective security and the injustice that had been done to his nation. While the emperor was in exile, the resistance within Ethiopia never died. Brave patriots known as the Arbanyok continued to fight a guerrilla war against the Italian occupiers. From the mountains and remote countryside, they launched raids and ambushes, making the Italian occupation costly and difficult. Haile Selassie remained their symbolic leader. His very existence gave them hope that one day their legitimate ruler would return and their country would be free once more. The emperor worked to coordinate support for these freedom fighters, ensuring their struggle was not forgotten by the outside world. He was the focal point of Ethiopian hope. The emperor's prophecy at the League of Nations began to come true. The aggression of the Axis powers was not contained. In 1939, World War II erupted in Europe. The United Kingdom, now at war with Italy, finally saw Haile Selassie as a valuable ally. The British began to actively support the Ethiopian cause. They provided military training, weapons, and logistical support for a campaign to liberate Ethiopia. In 1941, Haile Selassie flew to Sudan. There he joined forces with the British and the Ethiopian patriots. He crossed the border back into his homeland to lead the final push against the Italian forces. On May 5th, 1941, exactly 5 years to the day after he had been forced to flee, Emperor Haile Selassie triumphantly re-entered his capital, Addis Ababa. He returned not just as a monarch restored to his throne, but as a victorious commander and a global symbol of freedom's triumph over tyranny. The crowds that greeted him were ecstatic. His return marked the end of the Italian occupation and the restoration of Ethiopian independence. Ethiopia became the first nation to be liberated from Axis occupation during World War II. The emperor's long, patient struggle in exile had finally been vindicated. He could now resume his life's work of building a modern Ethiopia. After his restoration, Haile Selassie's stature on the world stage was immense. He was seen as a senior statesman, a figure who had stood up to fascism and won. As the post-war era unfolded, a wave of decolonization swept across Africa. One by one, nations threw off the yoke of European rule and gained their independence. The emperor, as the leader of a nation that had successfully resisted colonization for centuries, became a powerful and inspirational figure for these new African leaders. He was a living symbol of African sovereignty and dignity. His story gave hope and encouragement to independence movements across the continent. The emperor understood that political independence was only the first step. He believed that for Africa to be truly strong and respected on the world stage, its nations needed to work together. He envisioned a united continent where African countries could solve their own problems, promote economic cooperation, and speak with a single powerful voice in international affairs. He began to champion the idea of Pan-Africanism, not just as a cultural movement, but as a political reality. He used his considerable diplomatic skill and international prestige to bring Africa's diverse leaders together. His efforts culminated in a historic gathering in May 1963. The leaders of 32 newly independent African states came to Addis Ababa at the invitation of the emperor. In a landmark speech, he urged his fellow leaders to set aside their differences and forge a common destiny. What we require is a single African organization, he declared, through which Africa's single voice may be heard. He argued that unity was the key to overcoming the legacies of colonialism, poverty, and division. His impassioned plea helped to bridge divides between different factions and ideologies among the new leaders. The result of this conference was the creation of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. It was a monumental achievement. The OAU provided a forum for African nations to cooperate on political, economic, and social issues. Addis Ababa was chosen as its permanent headquarters, cementing the city's status as the political capital of Africa. Haile Selassie was widely acclaimed as the father of modern Africa for his pivotal role in its founding. Through the OAU, he helped to mediate disputes between African nations and championed the cause of liberation for those countries still under colonial or white minority rule. His vision had helped to give a continent its collective voice. Far away from the world of international diplomacy, Haile Selassie's name took on a meaning of profound spiritual significance. In the 1930s, a new religious and political movement began to emerge among poor communities in Jamaica. This movement became known as Rastafari. Its followers were inspired by the teachings of Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican political leader who promoted black pride and the idea of a return to Africa. Garvey had famously prophesied, "Look to Africa, when a black king shall be crowned, for the day of deliverance is near." For many, the coronation of Haile Selassie I in 1930 was the fulfillment of this prophecy. Rastafarians saw Haile Selassie as much more than just an earthly king. They revered him as a divine figure, the second coming of Christ, and the living God whom they called Jah. They took their name from his pre-coronation title, Ras Tafari. His official titles, particularly King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah, were seen as proof of his divinity, connecting him directly to the biblical lineage of Kings David and Solomon. For Rastafarians, Ethiopia was Zion, the Promised Land, and Haile Selassie was the Messiah who would lead the African diaspora out of oppression and back to their ancestral homeland. The emperor himself was a devout Ethiopian Orthodox Christian and never claimed to be divine. He seemed somewhat perplexed by the Rastafarian belief in his divinity. However, he did not reject them. In 1966, he made a state visit to Jamaica. The event was momentous. An enormous crowd of Rastafarians gathered at the airport to greet the man they considered their god. The scene was one of overwhelming passion and emotion. During his visit, he met with Rastafari elders. As a gesture of solidarity, he set aside land in Ethiopia in a place called Shashamana for members of the African diaspora who wished to repatriate to their ancestral continent. This connection elevated Haile Selassie's global image beyond that of a political leader. He became a cultural icon. The Rastafari movement, through its distinctive music, reggae, spread his name and image across the globe. Artists like Bob Marley sang of him as a figure of redemption and liberation. His face, often depicted alongside the Lion of Judah, became a powerful symbol of black pride, anti-colonialism, and spiritual resistance. Even for those who did not share the Rastafarian faith, Haile Selassie came to represent a majestic and dignified African leader, a symbol of an ancient heritage and a future of freedom. The later years of Haile Selassie's long reign were marked by growing challenges and internal discontent. While he was celebrated abroad as a venerable statesman and a father of African unity, the situation at home in Ethiopia was becoming increasingly difficult. The very modernization he had initiated had created new problems. The educated class he had nurtured began to demand faster political reforms and greater democracy than the aging emperor was willing to grant. They grew frustrated with the slow pace of change and the concentration of power in the hands of the emperor and the old aristocracy. Economic hardship also began to plague the country. A series of droughts in the early 1970s led to a devastating famine, particularly in the northern province of Wollo. Hundreds of thousands of Ethiopians perished. The imperial government was accused of trying to hide the scale of the disaster from the outside world and of being slow and ineffective in its response. Images of starving people, secretly filmed and then broadcast internationally, shattered the emperor's carefully cultivated image as a benevolent and competent ruler. The contrast between the suffering of the peasants and the lavish lifestyle of the imperial court caused widespread anger and resentment. This combination of political frustration and economic crisis created a perfect storm. Protests erupted in the capital, led by students and taxi drivers. The military, which the emperor had built up as a pillar of his power, began to mutiny over low pay and poor conditions. A coordinating committee of junior military officers, known as the Der, gradually seized control. They were a radical, Marxist-leaning group. They skillfully used the public's anger over the famine and government corruption to systematically dismantle the emperor's authority. They arrested his officials, took over state media, and placed the emperor himself under effective house arrest within his own palace. The end came on September 12, 1974. Officers from the Derg entered the Jubilee Palace and formally deposed the 82-year-old emperor. They read a proclamation officially ending his 44-year reign and the ancient Solomonic dynasty that had ruled Ethiopia for millennia. Haile Selassie, the Lion of Judah, was quietly escorted from his palace and driven away in a small Volkswagen Beetle. He was held in confinement, and his fate remained a mystery for a time. In August 1975, the Derg announced that the former emperor had died. The official reason given was complications from surgery, but it is widely believed that he was murdered on the orders of the new military regime. The legacy of Haile Selassie I is as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. For Ethiopia, he is a figure of profound contradiction. He is remembered as the great modernizer who laid the foundations for the contemporary state. He introduced a constitution, expanded education, and built crucial infrastructure. He is also the patriot king who defended his nation's sovereignty against foreign invasion and successfully restored its independence. Yet he is also seen as an autocrat who clung to absolute power for too long, whose resistance to faster political reform ultimately led to a violent revolution that plunged the country into decades of turmoil and civil war. For the continent of Africa, his legacy is clearer and overwhelmingly positive. He stands as a giant of 20th century African history. As the leader of a nation that was a beacon of independence, he inspired countless others in their struggles against colonialism. His pivotal role in founding the Organization of African Unity gave the continent a collective voice and a framework for cooperation that endures to this day in its successor, the African Union. He is rightly remembered as a father of Pan-Africanism, a statesman who believed in and worked for a united and dignified Africa. On the world stage, Haile Selassie remains a symbol of courage and moral principle. His 1936 speech to the League of Nations is a timeless appeal for international justice and collective security. It is a powerful warning against the dangers of appeasing aggressors, a lesson that remains deeply relevant in our own time. Furthermore, through his unexpected connection to the Rastafari movement, his image has transcended politics. He became a global icon of black pride, spiritual resistance, and the hope for liberation from the oppression carried across the world by the powerful rhythms of reggae music. His story, from a young prince in a remote province to a global figure revered as a god, is a remarkable journey. It is a story of ambition, vision and resilience, but also one of tragedy and the limitations of power. Haile Selassie I was a man of his time, a transitional figure who attempted to bridge the gap between an ancient feudal world and the demands of the modern age. His successes and failures continue to shape Ethiopia, Africa, and the world's understanding of leadership and justice. The Lion of Judah may be gone, but his roar still echoes through history. If you enjoyed learning about the remarkable legacy of Haile Selassie I, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more captivating history, and share it with friends who would be inspired by his story. Your support helps us bring more stories from history to life.
When we think of great leaders, we often picture loud voices and big actions. We think of kings and generals on the battlefield. But true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is a quiet, steady light. A light that shines in the darkest of times. This is the story of Empress Menen Asfaw of Ethiopia. She was a woman whose power came from her heart. Her story is one of grace, courage, and deep love for her people. She was the wife of the famous Emperor Haile Selassie, but she was so much more than that. She was a leader in her own right. Her work changed Ethiopia forever, especially for women and children. Her life is a powerful lesson for all of us. It shows us that you don't need a crown to be a queen in your community, you just need a heart full of compassion. Empress Menen's story has been whispered, but not shouted. It has been kept in the hearts of Ethiopians. But it is a story the whole world needs to hear. It is a story about the incredible strength of a woman who faced war, exile, and immense challenges. Yet she never lost her hope, she never stopped serving others. She built schools, she cared for the sick, she gave a voice to the voiceless. Today, we are going to shine a bright light on this amazing woman. We will walk through her journey. From her humble beginnings to her place on the throne, we will see how she used her position not for herself, but for her people. Empress Menen was a true mother to her nation. She nurtured it with kindness and dedication. She planted seeds of hope that are still growing today. Her life teaches us that leadership is about service. It is about lifting others up. It is about leaving the world a little better than you found it. So, get ready to be inspired. Get ready to learn about a heroine whose name you may not know, but whose spirit you will never forget. Her story is a testament to the power of quiet strength. It is a reminder that one person, filled with love and purpose, can truly make a difference. Empress Menen Asfaw was that person, and her light continues to shine, showing us the way. Let's celebrate her life and learn from her incredible example of leadership and love. Every great story has a beginning. Empress Menen's story starts in the beautiful highlands of Ethiopia. She was born on April 3, 1891, in a region called Wollo. Her family name was Walada Giorgis. She was born into a world of tradition and change. Even as a little girl, there was something special about her. She had royal blood in her veins. Her family was connected to the powerful rulers of Wollo. This meant she grew up understanding duty and responsibility. She learned early on that her life might have a greater purpose. Her destiny was woven into the fabric of her nation's history. Imagine growing up in Ethiopia at that time. It was a period of great uncertainty. There were conflicts and struggles for power. The country was fighting to stay independent. Young Menen saw this all around her. She witnessed the strength and resilience of her people. This shaped her character. It made her strong. It made her compassionate. She learned that to lead is to understand the struggles of your people. Her childhood was not just about royal heritage. It was about learning life's toughest lessons early. These experiences prepared her for the incredible journey that lay ahead. She was not just a girl with a royal name, she was also deeply connected to her faith. From a young age, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was a central part of her life. Her faith gave her strength. It gave her a moral compass. It taught her about forgiveness, kindness, and service to others. This spiritual foundation would become her rock throughout her life. It would guide her through personal tragedies and national crises. Her deep faith was not just a private belief, it was the source of her public actions. It fueled her desire to help and heal her nation. Her early life was a preparation for greatness. She was married at a very young age, as was the custom. She had children and faced the joys and sorrows of life like any other woman. But fate had a bigger plan for her. These early experiences, her royal roots, the challenges of her time, and her unwavering faith, all came together. They created a woman of incredible substance and character. A woman who was ready to stand beside an emperor. A woman who was ready to become a mother to an entire nation. Her journey was just beginning. In 1911, a very important event happened. It would change the course of Ethiopian history. Menen Asfaw married a young nobleman named Tafari Makanan. You may know him by his later name, Emperor Haile Selassie I. This was not just a love story, it was a union that brought Ethiopia together. At that time, the country was divided into different regions with powerful leaders. This marriage was a brilliant move. It connected two very important royal families. It helped to unite the country under one vision. It was a symbol of a new, unified Ethiopia. Their partnership was one of deep respect and shared purpose. He saw her wisdom and her kind heart. She saw his vision and his dedication to his country. Together they were a powerful team. She was his most trusted advisor. He often sought her opinion on important matters. Their marriage was a true partnership. It was built on love, faith, and a shared dream for a better Ethiopia. She was not just standing behind him, she was standing right beside him. They were equals in their commitment to their people. This made their leadership strong and effective. When Tafari Makanan was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie I in 1930, Menen was crowned Empress. This was a huge moment. For the first time, the Empress was crowned on the same day as the Emperor. This showed the world that she was not just a consort. She was a co-ruler. She had her own role, her own responsibilities. The people of Ethiopia saw her as their Itej, their Empress. She wore her crown with humility and grace. She knew it was a symbol of service, not of power. She was ready to fulfill her duties to her nation. The coronation was a spectacular event. Leaders from all over the world came to witness it. But for Empress Menen, the true meaning was in the promise it held. The promise of progress, the promise of education, the promise of a better life for all Ethiopians. Her marriage and coronation were not the end of her story. They were the beginning of her life's most important work. She was now in a position to make a real difference, and she did not waste a single moment. She immediately began her mission to lift up her people. Empress Menen believed that the future of Ethiopia depended on its children, and she knew that to educate a child, you must first educate its mother. This is why she became a fierce champion for girls' education. At that time, it was not common for girls to go to school, but Empress Menen was determined to change that. She opened the very first high school for girls in Ethiopia. It was called the Empress Menen School for Girls. This was a revolutionary act. It sent a clear message. Girls are valuable, their minds are precious. They deserve the same opportunities as boys. She didn't just build one school, she inspired a movement. She used her own money and influence to support education across the country. She visited schools, she encouraged students. She showed them that their empress believed in them. For thousands of Ethiopian girls, she opened a door that had been closed. She gave them the gift of knowledge. She gave them the chance to dream of becoming doctors, teachers, and leaders. She knew that an educated woman could lift up her entire family and her community. Her work in education was one of her greatest legacies. But her compassion did not stop at the school gates. Empress Menen had a heart that felt the pain of others. She saw the suffering of the poor, the sick, and the orphaned. and she took action. She established charities and organizations to help those in need. She was known to personally visit hospitals, bringing comfort to the sick. She founded the Ethiopian Women's Welfare Association. This organization worked to improve the lives of women and families. She was a hands-on leader. She didn't just give orders from the palace. She was out there with her people, sharing their burdens. She became a true mother figure for the entire nation. People called her Emahoi, which means a revered mother. When there was a crisis, she was there. When there was a need, she responded. She helped build orphanages for children who had lost their parents. She supported programs to feed the hungry. Her charity was not for show. It came from a place of genuine love and empathy. Empress Menen showed what it means to lead with a servant's heart. She used her power to protect and care for the most vulnerable members of her society. In 1935, a dark cloud gathered over Ethiopia. Fascist Italy under Mussolini invaded her beloved country. This was a time of great fear and suffering. The war was brutal. The Ethiopian people fought bravely, but the enemy had modern weapons. For Empress Menen, this was a heartbreaking time. She saw her people being hurt. She saw her country being torn apart. But in the face of this darkness, her spirit did not break. Instead, her courage shone brighter than ever. She stood strong beside her husband, the emperor, as a symbol of resistance. During the war, she became the head of the Ethiopian Red Cross. She worked tirelessly to organize medical aid for the wounded soldiers and civilians. She turned palace grounds into makeshift hospitals. She mobilized women to serve as nurses. She was on the front lines of the home front, leading the relief efforts. She showed incredible strength and resolve. When the capital, Addis Ababa, was in danger, she ensured the safety of her children before thinking of herself. Her priority was always her family and her people. Her bravery inspired everyone around her. Eventually, the emperor and his family were forced into exile. They had to leave their home to continue the fight for Ethiopia's freedom from abroad. This must have been one of the hardest moments of her life. Leaving her country and her people behind was a great sacrifice. They settled in Bath, England. But exile was not a vacation. It was a continuation of the struggle. Empress Menen never saw it as a time to rest. She saw it as a new battlefield, a place where she could fight for her country with different weapons: diplomacy, fundraising, and prayer. Even far from home, her heart remained with her people. She co-founded the Ethiopian World Federation. This organization helped to gather support for Ethiopia from around the world. She organized fundraisers to buy medical supplies for the resistance fighters back home. She spent countless hours in prayer, asking for God's protection over her nation. She was a beacon of hope for Ethiopians everywhere. She reminded them that they were not forgotten. She was their empress, fighting for them, even from thousands of miles away. Her strength during these years of exile was truly remarkable. At the very core of Empress Menen's being was her deep, unshakable faith. She was a devout member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. For her, faith was not just a Sunday ritual, it was the air she breathed. It was the foundation upon which she built her life of service and compassion. In times of peace, her faith guided her charity. In times of war, it was her shield. She believed that with God, all things were possible. This powerful belief gave her the strength to face unimaginable challenges, from personal loss to the invasion of her country. Her support for the church was legendary. She didn't just pray in the churches, she helped build them. She used her personal funds to construct and renovate many churches and monasteries throughout Ethiopia. She understood that these were not just buildings. They were the spiritual heart of the community. They were places of refuge, learning, and hope. One of her most famous contributions was to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. She sponsored the rebuilding of a chapel there, ensuring that Ethiopia had a strong presence in the holiest city in Christendom. Her piety was personal and sincere. She was known to spend hours in prayer each day. She observed the long and rigorous fasts of the church faithfully. This spiritual discipline was not for public display. It was a private conversation with God. It was where she found her peace and her purpose. Her example inspired the people around her. They saw an empress who was powerful, yet humble before God. This made her even more beloved. Her spiritual leadership was just as important as her political role. She was the spiritual mother of the nation, guiding her people with grace and prayer. This deep faith was her anchor during the difficult years of exile. While living in England, she established a small Ethiopian Orthodox chapel in their home. It was a piece of Ethiopia, a sacred space where she could connect with God and pray for her country's liberation. She believed firmly in the power of prayer to change circumstances. She prayed for the safety of the freedom fighters. She prayed for the suffering civilians, and she prayed for the day they would all return home. Her faith was not passive. It was an active, powerful force for good in the world. After 5 long years of exile, the day Empress Menen had prayed for finally arrived. In 1941, Ethiopian and Allied forces liberated Ethiopia from Italian occupation. The Emperor and Empress could finally go home. Their return was a moment of incredible joy and celebration for the entire nation. The people lined the streets to welcome back their beloved leaders. For Empress Menen, it was a deeply emotional moment. She was returning to a country that was wounded but not broken. She knew that the work of rebuilding was just beginning. There was no time to rest. She immediately threw herself back into her mission of service. The war had left behind many scars. There were orphans to care for, hospitals to rebuild, and a nation to heal. She picked up right where she left off, with even more determination. She expanded her work with the Empress Menen School for Girls, ensuring that a new generation of women would have the tools to help rebuild the country. She also focused on healthcare, supporting the construction of new hospitals and clinics. She understood that a healthy nation was a strong nation. Her role as a mother figure became even more important after the war. She was a symbol of stability and nurturing care in a country recovering from trauma. She continued her work with the Ethiopian Women's Welfare Association, empowering women to take an active role in society. She never sought the spotlight. Her leadership style was quiet but incredibly effective. She worked behind the scenes, making sure that projects were funded and that help reached those who needed it most. Her steady presence was a source of comfort and strength for all Ethiopians. Even as she grew older, her commitment never wavered. She remained active in her charitable work and her support for the church until the end of her life. She passed away on February 15, 1962. The entire nation mourned her loss. She was buried in the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Addis Ababa, next to her husband. Her passing marked the end of an era, but her legacy was already firmly planted in the hearts of her people. She had shown them what it means to lead with love, to serve with humility, and to never give up hope. So, why does the story of Empress Menen Asfaw matter so much today? It matters because it is a story about the incredible power of a woman's leadership. She showed us that leadership is not about being the loudest person in the room. It is about compassion, service, and quiet strength. In a world that often overlooks the contributions of women, her life is a powerful reminder that women have always been at the heart of building nations. She was a queen, a mother, a warrior, and a servant all in one. Her example continues to inspire women in Ethiopia and around the world to this day. Her legacy lives on in the institutions she built. The schools she founded have educated generations of women who have gone on to become leaders in their own right. The hospitals she supported continue to heal the sick. The charities she established still provide care for the vulnerable. These are not just buildings or organizations, they are living monuments to her vision and her love for her people. She planted seeds of progress that have grown into mighty trees, providing shade and fruit for so many. Her influence is woven into the very fabric of modern Ethiopian society. Empress Menen's life is also a timeless lesson in resilience. She faced war, exile, and personal tragedy, but she never allowed hardship to defeat her spirit. Her unwavering faith and her deep sense of purpose carried her through the darkest of times. Her story gives us hope. It teaches us that even when things seem impossible, we can find strength within ourselves and our faith to keep going. She is a beacon of hope for anyone facing a struggle. She shows us that grace and dignity can be our greatest weapons against adversity. Ultimately, Empress Menen Asfaw was more than an empress. She was a gift to her people. She lived a life of purpose, and she left the world a better place. Her story is not just a piece of history, it is a call to action. It challenges each of us to ask ourselves, how can we serve our communities? How can we lift others up? How can we lead with love? Empress Menen showed us the way. Her light was quiet, but it was powerful, and it continues to shine, reminding us of the extraordinary difference one beautiful life can make. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.